J. Edgar, movie review. J. Edgar is a biopic of J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director of the FBI from 1930 all the way to 1972 and had a rather infamous career as director of the FBI. We'll get into some of that a little bit later. The movie came out in 2011, although I personally did not see it until 2013. I was very interested in it when I heard it came out in 2011. I was reading the reviews of it, but I was living in Cambodia at the time and there were no movie theaters showing this movie in Cambodia back in 2011, so I had to wait around till I saw it on DVD. But anyways, the movie was written by Dustin Lance Black, who's the same guy who wrote the screenplay for the biopic Milk, which is another biopic I've talked about before here on this channel, and I'll link to my review of Milk in the description down below. But according to Wikipedia, Dustin Lance Black was writing this movie from 2008. He first began working on it. Once the script was completed, the studio brought in Clint Eastwood to direct it. According to Wikipedia, this was because the studio wanted to save money and Clint Eastwood had a reputation for filming movies on the cheap. And in fact, Clint Eastwood delivered on that. He got this movie in under budget, so studio saved some money. It's interesting, I read reviews of this movie and everyone is crediting it with Clint Eastwood's vision, and I don't know. Maybe the director does have considerable influence on the movie. But I thought it was funny reading that Wikipedia article where Clint Eastwood was brought in after this was already, everything was already written, essentially. Just a little side note. Anyways, let's talk about J. Edgar Hoover. So, like I said, when this movie first came out, I was very interested in it. I was a big history nerd, so I'm always a sucker for these biopics of great, infamous American lives. I almost said great there, but maybe that's not quite the right word. In addition, I was interested in the career of J. Edgar Hoover because I had an intellectual trajectory that I think is similar to a lot of leftist Americans. When I grew up in a conservative environment, I was raised to believe that, the FBI is always the good guys, right? They're the heroes protecting us from the evil forces of communism or destruction or chaos or terrorism, whatever. But then when I got into college and took a couple college classes, then I learned about all the terrible things that the FBI had done under J. Edgar's direction. He had used the FBI, he had abused his powers as the FBI to target certain politicians he didn't like. He had gone after civil rights leaders, most infamously Martin Luther King, who J. Edgar Hoover tried to blackmail into committing suicide and had taped audio of King's marital infidelities, which he tried to blackmail Martin Luther King with. Also, under J. Edgar Hoover's tenure at the FBI set up a COINTEL program. COINTEL was the name of the program, which was targeting disruption of anti-war activists and black radicals with methods which were illegal. And it looks like some of these efforts may have led to a political assassination. Fred Hampton of the Black Panthers was assassinated by the police based on information from COINTEL, and the exact details of what happened are still a little bit murky, but it looks like either the FBI or the Chicago Police Department had planned his assassination, or both of them in collaboration. So, you read all that stuff and you're like, oh, wow, the FBI is not the good guys after all. They're infamous for abusing their powers to put down civil rights activists. Now, I guess to be fair, this was maybe arguably a unique period in American history, and in the 1970s, when some of these abuses came to light, Congress did rein in the FBI, and, well, who knows what's going on now, huh? Maybe in another 30 years we'll find out what the FBI is doing right now, but presumably that era of American history is past. Anyways, the point being, as someone with an interest in this kind of political history, I was really interested to see some of this stuff dramatized. And I was excited that this was a mainstream Hollywood movie which was going to bring this history to a mainstream American audience, because, like I said, it's the type of thing you don't really learn in your high school history class, or at least I didn't. I mean, you let me know in the comments what your experience was. But my experience is, unless you took a couple college-level history courses, if you didn't take any history courses after high school, odds are you might not even learn about this kind of stuff. So that's it. So, despite my fascination with J. Edgar Hoover, my wanting to really like this movie, I found it a bore. It was hard to sit through. And I've been looking at a couple other reviews online before filming this video, watching a couple other people's YouTube videos. And this seems to be the common consensus. Most everyone seems to think that this movie was really boring. And I was trying to think, okay, why is it boring? Why didn't it work? Because the movie does try and cram in a lot of interesting stuff. And on an individual level, there are all sorts of really interesting episodes in this movie. But I think it didn't work because there was no narrative momentum. It was too episodic. So I feel a little bit guilty saying this, because as a history nerd, I'm usually the kind of person who criticizes movies when they're not historically accurate, saying, oh, they changed that and they left this part out. And, my platonic idea of a history movie is something that puts everything in and sticks exactly to the facts. But that's not the way that a movie works, right? Movies need a narrative arc. And some historical figures, you have that narrative arc, right? I'm thinking of movies like Spartacus or Braveheart, which, I know neither of those movies is particularly historically accurate, but you have the general story is that there's these climactic battle scenes at the end, which, the movie kind of writes itself. But J. Edgar Hoover was not a Spartacus or a William Wallace. He was a government bureaucrat. So there's no big battle scene at the end where he rides his horse and attacks the enemy troops. You just have to figure out a way to make the life of a government bureaucrat interesting. And not only to make it interesting, but to give it some sort of narrative momentum, like you feel like you're working towards a climax. And this movie just doesn't do that at all. And granted, that would be a tough thing to write under any circumstances. But I think this movie makes a couple of choices which doesn't help. One is they're jumping around in time. So the narrative framework is that it presents an elderly Hoover who's dictating his memoirs to junior levels of the FBI. And this framework allows it to jump back in time between the present and the past. And I can see why they did that. Arguably, you look at all the series of disconnected events that are in Hoover's life, and you say, okay, we need some sort of framework to work these events into. And the other thing that the screenwriter did, which I thought was clever, is it presents Hoover as an unreliable narrator. So he is either trying to deceive the people he's telling the story to, or I think the explanation that the movie was heavily alluding to is that he just has started to believe his own propaganda after a while. He'd been telling these stories for so long, he started to believe they're true. One of the things that Hoover, I guess, was infamous for was trying to claim the credit for everything the Bureau did. So he didn't want individual agents of the FBI to become famous. He wanted all the glory himself. Now, spoiler alert here. Excuse me. Got a bit of a sore throat. What makes this clever, I think, is particularly the way the movie has the reveal at the end, where the audience isn't kind of let in on the full extent to which Hoover is recreating the truth until the reveal at the end. It's clever. I think it's the kind of thing that probably looks better on paper than it actually does as a cinematic experience. As a cinematic experience, I think it makes the movie feel a little bit too disjointed. The other thing that this movie did that I didn't really like is they focused too much on Hoover's personal life. Particularly his relationship with his mother in the beginning, and then the relationship with a guy named Clyde Tolson, which takes up the majority of the movie. Now, to give credit where credit is due, I had no idea who Clyde Tolson was before I saw this movie. So Clyde Tolson was Hoover's deputy, who was with Hoover all the time, according to Wikipedia. They were always together. And the exact nature of their relationship is open to speculation. The movie takes the view that they were in love with each other and homosexual relationship kind of way, but because they were both men of their times, where homosexuality was not acceptable, and they were, of course, working for the establishment, they could not openly keep their relationship, and they as the movie portrays, they had a hard time even admitting to themselves what was going on. Leading to a lot of repressed emotions and kind of arguing with each other over peripheral things when they were really, what they were really arguing over each other with was the relationship they had with each other. So I mean, to a certain extent, I appreciate just being educated about who Clyde Tolson is. And shortly after I saw this movie, I rewatched Nixon by Oliver Stone, which I had seen before, but was rewatching it. Nixon by Oliver Stone came out years before this movie came out, I believe in 1995. But that movie also has J. Edgar Hoover and Clive Tolson together in the movie. After seeing the Clint Eastwood movie, I was able to go back to the Oliver Stone movie and say, okay, that's the guy who's hanging out with J. Edgar Hoover in Oliver Stone's movie Nixon. So he's someone who's occasionally portrayed in movies and media and stuff like that, but I just never clued into who he was. Now, of course, after seeing J. Edgar, the Clint Eastwood movie, J. Edgar, I know perfectly who he is. Okay, so I didn't like that he took up too much of the screen time of this movie, though. And again, to a certain extent, I understand why they did it. Like I just said, this movie needs a narrative arc. It can't just be episode after episode after episode. But I just wasn't interested in their relationship all that much. I mean, to my mind, what makes J. Edgar Hoover interesting is the historical stuff. And, you know, the verifiable historical stuff. His vendettas against politicians, his vendetta against Martin Luther King, the Palmer raids, all the real historical stuff. And so, I mean, I know I just said that focusing on the historical stuff is just going to make this episodic because it's the life of a government bureaucrat. But I wish the screenwriter would have found a way to make the historical stuff interesting and downplay the personal stuff. What exactly that way would have been, I'm not sure. But then, you know, they're not paying me the big bucks to be a Hollywood screenwriter. But something which would have made me dramatize the historical stuff more, because all these relationship things, and at one point there's this big yelling scene that J. Edgar Hoover and Clyde Tolson have in a hotel, and I think that part is completely fictitious. That's not documented anywhere to my understanding. That's just the screenwriter's imagination. Some of this is my bias because I always complain in biopics when personal drama outweighs the actual historical stuff. I've got a limited tolerance for, I guess, what I consider sap and overly emotional stuff. I know I'm a cold-hearted monster, but that's my personal bias. This movie definitely veered too far in that direction for my tastes. So there were a lot of interesting stuff in here. There was a lot of interesting stuff in here, but So I'd almost give it a cautious recommendation. But there was also a lot of boring stuff in here and a lot of stuff I didn't care for. You know what? If you're going to check out this movie, I might almost recommend that you just pause it halfway through, because it's a long thing to sit through. But you know, just take a breather. Don't watch the whole thing at once. Maybe that would be the best way to do it. So yeah, I think those are my thoughts on the movie as a whole. Now there are a couple little odds and ends I'll just talk about for a while. One is the fingerprinting issue. So this movie, and if you get the DVD extras as well, made such a big deal about how Hoover revolutionized the science of criminal investigation by bringing in fingerprinting into it. And the way the movie portrays it, it's like Hoover had this idea for fingerprinting and everyone else was like, what? What's this crazy new science you're talking about, fingerprinting? But Hoover believed in it, pressed it through, and in the face of opposition, made this actually a thing. What surprised me reading this movie, though, is I had read a Mark Twain book called Pudd'nhead Wilson, which was written in 1984. I reviewed it on this channel, actually, and I will, again, link to it in the description down below. But I had read that book at one point, and that book, written all the way back in 1894, uses fingerprinting to determine the identity of the mystery. So I thought, well, it can't be that new of a technique, because Mark Twain was already writing about using fingerprints to identify who did the crime all the way back in 1894. I'm not sure what I mean. I don't know. Maybe people forgot about it for the next 50 years, or it was just something I was surprised by. Okay, so leaving fingerprinting aside, the other thing, I saw a couple reviews on Salon, which is kind of a leftist site, that were accused this movie of being a little bit too nice to J. Edgar Hoover and whitewashing his legacy. Because this movie completely left out the COINTELPRO stuff. The stuff I was talking about at the beginning of this review, the FBI efforts to disrupt and harass anti-war activists and black radicals, and may even have been involved in some assassination of black radicals. Completely left out of this movie. I personally, though, I suspect the reason that it got left out of this movie was less because of politics and more because of just timing issues. Like, you can't fit everything into a 2-hour movie. The movie feels a little bit overstuffed even as it is. And J. Edgar Hoover had a long and eventful career. And I think the movie does show J. Edgar Hoover's vendetta against Martin Luther King. J. Edgar Hoover was reportedly obsessed with Martin Luther King, like he obsessively hated him. And that does come through in this movie, including a very dramatic scene. Well done, I think, in terms of Leonardo DiCaprio's acting. Leonardo DiCaprio plays J. Edgar Hoover. Maybe I haven't mentioned that yet. In which he's just... his face is screwed up with hate, and he's just barking out this letter that he wants the FBI to send to Martin Luther King Jr., or it's supposed to be sent anonymously as a blackmail letter. And I thought, since the movie so well portrayed that, to a certain extent, you don't even need to get into the fact that he was also against black radicals. I mean, especially because Martin Luther King's legacy nowadays, I mean, everybody regards Martin Luther King as like the perfect American. So to show J. Edgar Hoover so blatantly on the wrong side of history on that issue, I think the movie had done enough by that point to show that J. Edgar Hoover was completely on the wrong side of history with the civil rights movement. The COINTELPRO stuff might just have been beating a dead horse in terms of the audience sympathies, at least. Although, by all means, all Americans should learn about COINTEL and the abuses that the FBI did, but maybe not in this movie. There's an interesting little tidbit on Wikipedia by a historian who notes that scene probably didn't happen. The scene of Hoover dictating the letter didn't happen like that, probably. He said, well, such a letter was written. Hoover almost certainly delegated it to others within the Bureau. So Hoover didn't actually dictate it himself, in other words. Which, from a cinematic standpoint, you can understand why it's much better to have Hoover dictating it himself, right? Hoover delegating a letter to be written that does not make for a great scene. Still, it's maybe good to remember that the letter was delegated, because it means you can't just pin all of this on Hoover. There was this whole organization which was, for whatever reason, because of their own biases or because of their just following orders or whatever, was enabling Hoover to pursue his vendetta against Martin Luther King and the other civil rights leaders. Yeah. Okay, I think I've said most of what I wanted to say about this movie. I'll finish off here. If you've seen this movie, let me know what you thought about it. And also, I'm just always curious. When did you learn about the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover and all the terrible stuff that they did? Did they talk about it in your high school? Was it years after high school that you learned about it? Have you not learned about it yet? It's always just interesting to learn when we learn about this stuff. Okay.